The Cupcakes have been devoured. Now it's time for the Ducks. Penn State was expected to win its first three games with ease, and it certainly did, pounding Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. But now mighty Oregon is coming to town. This was the matchup everybody circled coming into the season. Oregon won the Big Ten last year, beating Penn State in the championship game, and both teams are right in the mix again this year, along, of course, with Ohio State to win the Big Ten in 2025. Oregon is 4-0 with wins over Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern, and most recently, Oregon State this past Saturday. Both of these teams are excellent. Neither has been tested, so something has to give Saturday night at Beaver Stadium. Welcome to another episode of Joe and the Fat Man. Joe Smeltzer of Nittany Sports Now, joined as always by Kyle Fatman Golik, also of Nittany Sports Now. And Fatman, you've been following the Ducks closely, really since you started covering college football, and Oregon has had a lot of good teams in that time over the past decade. What are you seeing from this year's team that sticks out to you?
Joe, this is one of those teams that is a classic Oregon team that has been brewing since the Cristobal days, and even throughout a lot of Dan Lanning's early tenure. Very dominant in the trenches. This is a team that is in the Dan Lanning era at Oregon has only given up 32 sacks in 46 games. So you're not going to get to the quarterback often. Probably one of the most noticeable changes here in the Lanning era, and I've been pointing out in a lot of my articles, are he doesn't have a luxury of having the nation's most experienced starting quarterback. He enjoyed that the past three seasons with Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. He's going with now a former five-star out of Detroit in Dante Moore, and Moore has excelled. He embraced, it's James spoke to this today during his press conference that it speaks volume of the character that Dante Moore has. Someone who was previously a five-star recruit goes to Oregon, was willing to sit a year. It has probably aided in his development. They are amazing at the perimeter. They have themselves an amazing freshman base. So Jordan Davison leads all freshman running backs with 6 rushing touchdowns, Joe. DeCarrion Moore, who was one that James brought up, is as expected. He's the first Ducks true freshman wide receiver to start on opening day since Joshua Delgado. So that goes to tell you how special he really is. Defensively, Joe, I still think there's some things in the trenches that they really got to work on. I mean, they sent a lot to the NFL with Jordan Birch, Derek Harmon. They still got Mateo Uagalele. They did go in the portal. Remember when Penn State was vying for Bear Alexander? Well, Bear ended up in Eugene. So that's there. And they're great in the secondary. A great special teams. James mentioned about Atticus Sappington today. He's going to be a difference maker in a game if it comes down to kicks. Joe, this is as classic of an Ali Frazier fight that's going to happen Saturday night in Beaver Stadium.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't end up like the second Ali Frazier fight, where it was just kind of boring, and it's really the only one of the three that isn't remembered in boxing lore. But yeah, you mentioned Kyle. A lot of Oregon's playmakers offensively are true freshmen, with the Dante Moore to the Carrion Moore connection that's already causing a lot of damage in the running game with Jordan Davison too. That's all of those guys are going to have great careers down the line. But at the same time, you compare that to what Penn State has offensively, obviously, with Drew Aller in his third year starting quarterback, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, 4 years in the running game, and then even the receivers, even though they haven't spent a ton of time at Penn State. Pena, Hudson, and Ross are all guys with multiple years of college football experience and a lot of big game experience between those three. How much of an advantage is that for Penn State when the team you're playing against, the offense you're playing against, not only has never played in a whiteout game before, a lot of the difference makers on Oregon haven't come close to playing in a whiteout before or anything
So,
like it.
so when you have a whiteout conditions that you're going to have, it is a nice advantage for Penn State to be able to enjoy that advantage, because it is an environment that is truly fabled around college football. You hear it all the time that the two toughest environments are LSU at night and Penn State at night for the whiteout. So there is that. I remember, I would say about 10 years ago, when a couple of Urban Meyer's teams had come into Happy Valley, and they were asking them post game. I think it was on 11 Warriors. They were like, well, what's the toughest environment you've been in? And every single one of them said Penn State, even though they won the game, that it's not an easy place to get the W. Outson Stadium, the zoo in itself, is one of college football's most hostile environments and really, really tough to play in. So I think Penn State will have the home edge, and obviously a lot with, the geographic footing and all that stuff in place. So again, this is one of those games where if this game was at, like a big noon, I would think it would be a major advantage for Penn State, because Oregon's then playing at a 9 a.m. body clock, and maybe even 3:30 still a little bit of a rough one for the Ducks. But I think with this at night, it's going to be noisy there in Beaver Stadium, but I think Penn State's going to have to try to figure out how to confuse the Oregon offense whenever they are on the field, because that's where the noise is going to make the most advantage for them to succeed in this.
Yeah, it's obviously one of the biggest home games Penn State has had, maybe ever. And I'm trying to think about the last time Penn State played a game of this magnitude at Beaver Stadium. You had Ohio State last year, which that was huge, top 5 matchup with game day coming in and all that. But at the same time, I think Penn State was playing with a little bit of house money in that game, being that it was late enough in the season where it was clearly Penn State's last big test. And if Penn State lost to Ohio State, which ended up happening, everybody had that cushion of okay, we know we're probably going to finish 11-1, still make the playoff, and everything's going to be there for us, which that obviously ended up happening. This year, there's no cushion. If Penn State loses to Oregon, there's going to be very little confidence, I think, of this team going into Columbus and getting a win. And if Penn State looks bad in losing to Oregon, there's going to be some doubts about, games like Indiana and maybe even that road trip to Iowa too. Before 2024, I think the 2023 home game against Michigan, that was probably bigger in the sense that it was the last of the 14 playoff era. Penn State needed a win to have any chance of making the college football playoff and then get a win. But talking about pregame hype, Kyle, everybody was talking about Michigan. Even the guys covering Penn State, myself included, were hardly thinking of Penn State because it was so unprecedented what we were seeing with Michigan, with the scandal, Connor Stallions. Is Harbaugh going to coach or not? Just so much stuff surrounding Michigan now. Once Penn State lost the game, the focus turned to Penn State. But for pregame hype, Penn State just kind of happened to be the other team, and it was Michigan getting all the headlines. Aside from that, Auburn 2021, that was a big deal because it was coming out of COVID, but that's just not a matchup at the same magnitude. Ohio State 2022, Penn State was heavy underdogs in that game. I don't think anybody was expecting much there. But before that, I think the earliest you can go back is probably Ohio State 2018. And even then, that was still early enough in the Franklin era, I think, to where that big game James sarcastic moniker didn't exist too much yet. And the pressure that comes with Penn State playing in these types of matchups, I don't think was to the degree that it is 8 years later. So, yeah, this is probably, I think, the biggest home game of the Franklin era. And even going back before Franklin, you'd have to do a lot of thinking to go back to the last time Penn State had a matchup quite like this at Beaver Stadium.
The one that came to my mind would have been 99 home opener with Arizona when it was a top 5 matchup. You're right, Joe. This is a program setting game for them, because if Penn State were to win this, you would have to start saying, okay, Penn State's legitimately now one of the top 5 programs in the country right now. Because it's like I mentioned in my one column, while James Franklin does have that moniker of the big game James, a win here on Saturday means 3 of their last top 4 wins against have come against top 10 competition in in that realm. So it's starting to change that narrative. And if you have a Penn State win on Saturday, looking at Ohio State and Columbus, and then even with the following week with Indiana, that who's going to probably be in the top 10 when Penn State plays them, it gives the Nittany Lions that opportunity where it's a little bit of a cushion. If they are in 11-1, they're going to make the playoffs, because I'm thinking the stigma of going 10-2 isn't going to be enough for Penn State. I think they will sneak in, but I think they're starting to get that billowing when you start hearing the narratives. So I think this is a major game, and this is a game that changes Drew Aller's legacy, because it's no longer can Drew win the big game. It changes James Franklin's a good bit. It changes where Penn State's is. And when you have the recruits that are in town and they see what happens when you win one of these things at this magnitude, it only gives you all the momentum.
Yeah, I think really all the pressure is on Penn State coming into this game. I think that Oregon is in a similar place to where Penn State was coming into the Ohio State game last year, and Penn State's taking on more of that Ohio State role. With Ohio State coming in the Happy Valley with one loss being to Oregon, it was really close to a must-win game for Ohio State. And if the Michigan game had played out the exact same way, Penn State could have changed the course of college football history by winning that game, which some people thought they should have won in Happy Valley. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way. Ohio State beats Penn State, has that loss to Michigan, sinks into the playoff, and becomes a buzzsaw and wins it all. But Oregon, much like I said earlier, how when Penn State played Ohio State, it was undefeated, and Penn State fans knew that even with a loss, there was nothing stopping Penn State from going 11-1 and making the playoff. Oregon's in a pretty similar spot. They avoid Ohio State this year, which is huge. And even with a loss to Penn State, they have two ranked games on the rest of their schedule, and both of them are at home. I think as high as people are on Indiana right now after that 56-point win, a 56-point win will do that against anybody, let alone a top 10 team. I don't think a lot of people are going to be feeling good about Indiana going to Autzen Stadium and getting a win. And then USC, I'm not sold on USC. They're a fringe top 25 team, and I don't think anybody's would be a lot of people will be picking the Trojans again, upset Ivor. So I think with Oregon losing to Penn State, they'll still be in good shape to go 11-1, make the college football playoff, maybe make the Big Ten championship game, depending on how things go. And they're really still they'll still be in pretty solid form, I think, with a loss. If Penn State loses, you still got Ohio State ahead, and you still have the narrative that Franklin can't win the big one, Howard can't win the big one, etc. So, yeah, this is unfamiliar in that, I mentioned the Ohio State and Michigan games of the past 2 years. All the pressure was on Ohio State last season. All the pressure was on Michigan, I think, 2 years ago. Now all the pressure's on Penn State. Nobody's really thinking about what this game means to Dan Lanning. They're thinking about what it means to James Franklin. Nobody's thinking about what it means for Dante Moore. They're thinking about what it means for Drew Aller. So, yeah, Penn State is definitely the one that everybody's going to be watching in this one. And I think all the pressure really falls on the home team. And I don't really think there's much of a debate there.
No, and the thing is, Lanning's early enough in his career where he's had a few redemptions and has redeemed himself. Franklin has, what's his record against Ohio State? 1-10, 1-11.
1-10.
Yeah, that's not going to help James Franklin's narrative. And then when you start combining a lot of other, big bowl game losses, think the Peach Bowl, think USC back in the 17 Rose Bowl, you start like the Notre Dame one even last year. It becomes to the point where, and I mentioned this, it's like Mark Richt, James will win you all the games that he's supposed to win you, but the games of major importance, they're all important, don't get me wrong. But when you start, asking fans, what are like the big ones? They talk these Oregon games, Ohio State, Michigan, USC. That's where James comes up short. And there has to be that reckoning of, much like I said in my column about this, about Franklin, is what do you want your legacy to be? I mean, James Franklin has a very secure, like he's a Hall of Fame resume right now. He can walk away right now and he has everything that he ever wanted to accomplish in college football, minus a national championship. So what does he want his legacy to be? I mean, he knows this. He's not naive to that. He knows he's, you know, been a head coach now for almost 15, 20 years now. And, he's not going to be doing this forever. So, these opportunities aren't going to be coming around a lot. So, what are you going to do when you have them? And it's right here for him. He has the team, he has the venue, he has the circumstances. They got to get it done, Joe.
They absolutely do have to get it done. When we come back, we'll be talking about James Franklin's press conference of Oregon Week Monday. We'll talk about our takeaways there when we return on Joe and the Fat Man.